Hello and welcome to today's class for CS 303 Operating Systems. This is chapter number 4 and lecture number 2. Okay, so CS 303 chapter number 4, lecture number 2. The main thing that we will be talking about today is pthread API. Okay, so this is an API or an application programming interface or a library of C functions which have been provided to us so that we can invoke various thread operations, right? So that is the main goal of today, to talk about this pthread API and use this API to create multi-threaded programs. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide number 2, and the question that this slide asks is why multi-threading? So in the last lecture we discussed about what this multi-threading is, and we discovered that many times it's possible that we examine the code of a process, and after that examination we find that there are sets of instructions, right, sets of pieces of code that can potentially run in parallel. So each of those sets of instructions becomes one thread. Okay, so all the threads share the same process address space. Lot of items that they share, for example the code section, some data, all open files, and there are some items which they have on their which they have of their own, right? So they have their own program counter, address of the next instruction, they have their own execution stack, they can call functions. Okay, so like this we saw that within a process we can have multiple threads of control, and the whole reason we are doing this is to have those threads run parallel. So if we don't have multi-threading, all instructions run sequentially and it takes longer, but if we can execute some sets of instructions in parallel, then we get a good speed up, our whole application finishes earlier. Okay. So we had discussed this model. What are some of the benefits that we can achieve by doing multi-threading? So some of these you already know of. One is responsiveness, right? So consider that web server application in which you have one web server and then you have a bunch of clients connecting to it, and if that application did not support multi-threading, then one client is processed at a time. So client 1 makes a request, their request is serviced, and then once that servicing request of client 1 is done, then client 2, their turn comes, and client 3, then client 4. So potentially if you have a large number of clients, then many of them would have to wait for a long amount of time. On the other hand, if the server is multi-threaded, it can create a separate thread for each client request, and then all those threads could run in parallel. So no waiting or less waiting, and lesser response time. There is no waiting if the number of requests is equal to the number of CPUs available, and there is in that case there is no waiting, because every request can more or less immediately get the CPU, and even if there are a smaller number of CPUs than there are requests, even then the response time is less as compared to if it was not multi-threaded. So responsiveness is definitely one advantage, better responsiveness. You get the results faster. Scalability, right? These threads can run in parallel on separate CPUs. This allows designers to scale the application to a large number of users, offering decent response times, as the parallelism of the CPUs can be exploited. So we know on modern machines we have many CPUs, multiple CPUs. Even the smallest of machines, as we have discussed, have 4 to 6 to 8 CPUs. Larger machines may even have hundreds and thousands. right? So what is the point of having multiple CPUs? The whole point is that you can run applications in parallel. So threads really fit well into that approach, because each thread can be run in parallel. So you have scalability, you can scale up, you can support a larger number of applications at the same time. And like in the case of the web server, you can scale it up, you can support a much larger number of clients and still give them good response times. Okay, so you can scale well to larger number of users. So which means that even with even as you're increasing the number of users, or even as you're increasing the number of clients, the performance is still good. So which means that your framework is scalable. Third is economy. Creating a thread within a process is cheaper than making a separate process out of it. Allocating resources and memory for process is expensive. Threads share resources and memory of its process. So again, here you have two options. Option one, for every request that you get, you create a separate process out of it. And option two is, for every request you get, you create a separate thread out of that request. So if you have to compare the two, of course, one way in which you can make a decision whether to make a process or thread is, are they going to be sharing code? Right? Are the requests going to be similar? And to some extent, if they are, right? If they are, then it's better to make them threads, because by default threads share, those that piece of code. Now, otherwise, if you compare, creating a process, creating a thread, creating a process involves more work from the point of the OS, right? Because first of all, for each process that you create, you have to identify an address space. Where in the main memory, are you going to allocate space to that process? So the memory management part of the operating system has to decide, right, based on some algorithms. So you have to find a certain amount of memory for it, right? Whereas in the case of a thread, that is not needed, because all the threads share the same address space of the corresponding process. Okay. So as such, the time to create a process is greater than time to create a thread. Even besides the issue of separate address space for a process, you have to sort of create different data structures for each thread. They will have their own code, their own data code space, their own data space, their own files, their own stack, their own registers, right, their own PC. So all these data structures have to be created, whereas in the case of a thread, only a fraction have to be created for every new thread. So only a stack, only a set of registers, only a program counter. Other data structures they share with other threads of the process. So as such, creating all these data structures, it takes time. You have to run some system calls. You have to allocate some memory. You have to set some pointers, right? So you have to execute some code. So creating each data structure takes some amount of overhead, some amount of time. When you create a thread, you have to, for each new thread, you have to create a smaller number of data structures as compared to creating a new process for every request, and therefore smaller number of data structures means smaller overhead. So therefore we say it is cheaper to create threads than to create separate processes. So because of these three, these three are big reasons why multi-threading makes good sense. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 3. Same question, why multi-threading? So this is a continuation of the previous slide. Another good reason is resource sharing. Okay. So we know that when we have separate processes, how can they share resources? Right. So the answer is, we discussed this in chapter number 3. Two techniques are there: shared memory and message passing. Right. So using that, they can share resources. Now the important point here is such techniques must be explicitly arranged by the programmer. Right. So by default, various processes do not share their resources. So we saw in that shared memory program, we have to execute some particular system calls. We have to set up a shared memory, then we have to map it to the address space of each process, right? Different processes. So there's extra work, and we have to explicitly do that. Right? In comparison, threads share resources by default. So no extra work, no extra system calls to do by the OS. So resource sharing here happens by default. If there are a bunch of client requests for a server, many parts of their code may be the same, as we have discussed, and therefore resource sharing is intuitive, it is logical. Now, so when you create threads, this resource sharing is happening by default. Whereas if there were processes, you would have to set that up explicitly by calling some extra system calls, and again that's more work, more overhead for the OS. So resource sharing is also good. Good reason to do multi-threading. Okay. So another potential design decision is you can make them parent and child, right? So what you can do is the child processes, each of them, instead of being processes, they could be threads, right? Okay, now I am on slide number 4. The title of this slide is multi-core, multi-processor programming. So for this discussion, we will assume a core and a processor or CPU are the same thing. Okay. So what exactly is this multi-core, multi-processor programming? Okay. So once again, the idea is, that the hardware is providing you with large number of or multiple CPUs. So which means that your processes, your programs, your applications, they should be designed to take advantage of those multiple processors or multiple cores, right? And one of the ways in which you can do that is by creating multi-threaded programs, right? So what it says is multi-core, multi-processor systems are placing pressure on programmers. Challenges include dividing activities, identifying code that runs in parallel, balance. So we look at the first one. So the first challenge is examining the code of a process and then determining which parts of the code can run in parallel, right? Which parts of the code can run in parallel. Now this may not be such an easy job because when the code is running, there are complex dependencies between one part of code in a process and the other part of code in the same process. So because of these complex dependencies, it becomes quite hard to extract the part of the code which can run in parallel with each other. Sometimes decision is easy, sometimes decision is hard. Okay, so that is definitely one challenge. Looking at a process and identifying code that runs in parallel. It is doable, but it can be challenging. Other issue is balancing processor load. So now when you have multiple CPUs, you have to make sure that the load is sort of roughly balanced. That is, you don't want a scenario in which you have 4 CPUs and still bulk of the jobs are being executed on one of the CPUs. The rest of the 3 are idle. So does that make sense? Of course not, because one of the CPUs is overutilized and the other 3 CPUs are underutilized. So you are not really using the power of multiple CPUs. It's as though your system is still a single CPU system. So the processor load has to be balanced, which means the part of the operating system which is called the dispatcher. So the job of the dispatcher is to take a process and dispatch it or send it to the appropriate CPU for execution. So which CPU should it be sent to, that it has to decide. So the dispatcher of part of the operating system has to ensure that the load of all CPUs is roughly balanced. So that can look at decisions like, okay, fine, now a process has come. These 3 CPUs look like they're quite fully loaded. One is 80%, one is 85%, one is 90%. The 4th CPU looks like it's only 10% loaded. So let me send it to the fourth CPU. So these kind of decisions. So data splitting among processors, again related to balanced processor load. Decide which application goes to which processor, right? Data dependency is a challenge, and if there are a lot of data dependencies, trying to parallelize the code will not be possible, because the whole idea is that each part of the code that runs in parallel is mostly independent, right? So for example, if you are sorting a large array, right, 1 to 1 million, then maybe you divide the array into 2 parts or 4 parts, quarter million each, and then the sorting of the quarter million, 1/4 of the array, it happens in parallel. And then what you have at the end of that stage is 4 sub arrays of a quarter million entries each sorted, and then you try to merge them. So in this case, when you're sorting the 1/4 of the array, you don't really require the data of the other arrays. Okay. So parallel means that each part has to run more or less independently. Okay. Testing and debugging is definitely more challenging for multi-core, multi-processor systems, because now there are many execution paths that have to be followed. Okay. So no doubt there is a lot to be gained performance-wise from these multi-processor or multi-core systems, but they throw open a lot of challenges as well. Okay. Next, we talk about the difference between parallelism and concurrency. Okay, so many times these terms are confused with each other. So are they the same? Are they different? What is the deal with these terms? So first let's look at parallelism. What is parallelism? So this implies a system can run more than one process or thread simultaneously. So at any particular point of time, right? Let's say time t1, multiple processes or threads are running, which means their instructions are being executed. So for thread 1, you're doing a load, at the same time for thread 2 you're doing a store, something like that, right? Concurrency allows, of course, each processor thread on a separate CPU. Concurrency allows many processes threads to make progress. Okay. So single process or core scheduler can provide concurrency. Okay. So concurrency is possible with a single processor or core. Right. So here what is happening is, as we discussed in the earlier chapters, you are supporting many processes, and then when process 1 does IO, you give the CPU to some other process, and then to process 3, then to process 4. Right. So allowing many processor threads to make progress, because if thread 1 is doing IO, then better give the CPU, that single CPU, to some other thread, so that overall larger number of threads make more progress per unit time. Okay. So now I am on slide number 5. Concurrency versus parallelism. So what are we seeing in the first part? Concurrent execution on a single core or single CPU system, right? So we are supporting many processes, right? Right? T1, T2, T3, T4, then T1, T2, T3, T4. So which means we can have concurrency even on a single CPU system. So what is happening is, let's say we are designing some kind of time slice, 5 millisecond, and then what we are doing is, after 5 millisecond we give the CPU to some other process. So initially we give the CPU to T1, task T1 or process T1, then after 5 millisecond we give the CPU to T2, then to T3, then T4, then T1, then T2, then T3, then T4, and then in a cyclic way this sort of happens, round robin, right? So what happens is even with a single CPU, even with a single core, we are providing the illusion, right? We are providing the illusion that the processes are sort of all these four processes are executing at the same time. Okay, so note that it is an illusion, right? Because we have only one CPU, so at any single point of time, how many processes can execute? Answer is only one. But the illusion is because the switching back and forth is happening so fast after every 5 milliseconds, which the human eye cannot perceive, too small. So the illusion is multiple processes are running at the same time. Once again I repeat, it's an illusion. Whereas in the bottom one we have parallelism on a multi-core, multi-CPU system. So here now, because we have two CPUs at any point of time, how many processes can run? 2. So we have T1, T2 running for some time, then T3, T4, T1, T2, T3, T4. Okay. So one way in which we can distinguish these two is that on a single CPU, on a single core, we can have concurrency. Yes. Can we have parallelism? No, because at any point of time only one executes. So we can have concurrency, but we cannot have parallelism on a single CPU. What about a multi-core, multi-CPU? Here we note we can have both concurrency and parallelism. Okay. So at any point of time I can run 2. So I am running T1 and T2. At the same time I can also switch among processes. So what we have done here is, because we have 4 processes, 4 tasks and 2 CPUs, 2 cores. So we have made a decision that T1 and T3 will run on core 1 and T2 and T4 will run on core 2. Okay, this is the scheduling decision. And now again we have one core, one CPU but 2 processes. So then we can do the round robin concurrency. So note that we are having both concurrency and parallelism on the multi CPU. Okay. So once again, concurrency is giving the illusion that many processes are executing at the same time, and parallelism is a reality that multiple processes are executing at the same time. So I hope now the difference between the two is clear. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide number 6, multi-core programming continued. Okay. So once again the idea is to identify pieces of code of the process that can run in parallel and then execute them on separate CPUs. Okay. So that overall the application finishes faster, right? Now they talk about 2 types of parallelism. One is data parallelism and one is task parallelism. So what are these two? Let us take a look, right? So data parallelism distributes subsets of the same data across multiple cores, same operations on each. So that example which I was talking about in the last slide, you have an array of 1 million entries, chop it up into 4 parts of a 250,000 entries each, and each sub-array is allotted, dispatched to a separate CPU for sorting, and then you combine the results. Okay, so that is data parallelism, right? In which you are distributing subsets of the same data across multiple cores, same operation on each part of the data, right? So each CPU works on part of the array for array addition or array sorting, whatever your operation is. Task parallelism, distributing threads across cores, each thread performing a unique operation. Okay. So here what's happening is, unlike the previous case where each subset of the data belong to the same process. So there is a process, there is a program that sorts an array, and all parts of that those subparts of or those sub arrays, all four of them belong to the same process or same thread. Okay. Now in task parallelism, you are distributing threads across cores, each thread performing a unique operation. So maybe you have one thread for finding the maximum in an array, one thread for finding the minimum in an array, one thread for sorting the array. So that is task parallelism. So I hope the difference between the two is clear, right? So in task parallelism, as an example, consider a large array, and then one thread is doing addition of all the elements of the array, one thread is doing a sorting of all the elements of the array, one is finding the maximum of all the elements of the array. So that is task parallelism. You have a bunch of threads, you distribute them to the cores, each thread doing a unique operation, whether it's sort or search or maximum or minimum or addition. Whereas in data parallelism, you take one process, right, and then you distribute or the data associated with one process, and you divide it into parts, and then each part goes to separate CPU or core. So same data, subsets of that go to different cores. Whereas in task parallelism, each separate task, each separate process goes to a different CPU. Okay. So in a way, you can the way you can compare is this is data parallelism involves distribution of data across multiple cores, right? And task parallelism involves distribution of tasks across multiple cores. Okay. So one distributes data across multiple cores, the other distributes tasks. Right. So task 1, core 1, task 2, core 2, that is task parallelism. In data, you are distributing data. So in task 1, you have a whole array, you distribute parts of it, and then you make threads, and then each runs on a separate core. Okay. So this is data parallelism and task parallelism. Okay. So I hope now the difference between the two is clear. So as the number of threads grows, so does architectural support for threading. Consider Oracle Spark server with 8 cores, 8 hardware threads. Multiple threads can be loaded for fast switching. So obviously the hardware has to support multiple threads for multi-threading to work, and you have to switch fast among threads. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 7, and now we talk about p-threads. Okay, so using this p-thread package, we can create multi-threaded applications. Okay, so this is the p-thread API, application programming interface, using which programmers can conveniently write multi-threaded applications. So this API is available for both Linux and Windows systems. Linux API is called pthreads, where P stands for POSIX. POSIX is Portable Operating System Interface, and generally it's meant to cover or work on non-Windows system. So which means Unix or Linux. So they can be used on Linux, Mac, and Solaris devices. So it's essentially an API, bunch of system calls, right? Each system call for a particular thread operation. So to illustrate this, we will now look at a sample C program in which a process creates a separate thread that performs some computation. Right? So we'll have a process running. Eventually, during the course of its execution, the process will create a thread, and then it will assign some task to that thread, which that thread will do. The task is very simple, calculating the sum of non-negative integers using this well-known formula, sigma I is 1 to n. Okay, so if n is 10, then 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up till 10. Okay, so we'll see how we can write a program that does this. Okay, so talking about the pthreads API, which has various system calls using which we can perform thread operations. Okay, now I am on slide 8, where we are going to discuss some of the thread function calls. Right. Now first is pthread create, as the name suggests. What is this call used for? So this is used for creating a new thread. So you can also search in the man pages and find out more about this function. So pthread underscore create is used for creating a new thread. Okay. So it is called with some arguments. What is TID? TID is the thread ID. So thread is sort of like a people call it a lightweight process, right? Light process, and it has an ID of its own, just like a process has an ID of its own. So TID is a thread ID. ATTR is a pointer to a structure that contains the attributes of the thread. So what kind of attributes can a thread have? Scheduling priority, state, memory size, and so on. Provided a thread is successfully created, you need to mention which function it should start executing. You need to know what the task is for that thread. So that is specified by start function. So upon its creation, the thread executes start function, and the start function may be called with an argument arg. So in this case, we want to add the first n numbers. So that value of n can be passed as an argument to start function. If successful, pthread returns a value of 0. So each of these are functions. They can have valid return values, right? So on success, pthread create returns 0. On error, it returns an error number, which you can use now to accordingly in a program. So if thread is not created, just print a message back to the user. Right. Another function is pthread underscore attr underscore init. So as the name suggests, this is used to initialize attr with all default values. So attr is a pointer to a structure which contains various thread attributes. So you can call this function with a pointer, and this will initialize all the thread attributes with their default values. Right. So scheduling priority, what is the default one? Right. And of course, if you want, you can set those attribute values at any time. So there are appropriate functions for setting up those attributes. For example, pthread underscore attr underscore set scheduling policy. So whichever policy you want, you can set that. Right. So pthread, let me just search for it. Set attr set schedule policy. Okay, so it takes me to the manual page. Right. And supported values for set scheduling policy are FIFO, first in first out, round robin, and then some others. Okay. So I can set them to any of those, which will dictate what is my scheduling policy for the threads. How are they going to be scheduled on the CPUs? Otherwise, if we don't set it, default policy will apply, whether it's first in first out or round robin. Okay, so these are two functions Function 1 creates a thread. TID is a thread ID. ATTR is a pointer to a structure that contains all the attributes. Upon successful creation of the thread, it starts execution from start function, and start function may be called with arguments. Right, and then pthread underscore ATTR underscore init initializes ATTR pointer with all the default values. Okay, so some more thread function calls. Pthread join. So generally, what will happen is your main process that creates a thread or multiple threads will do a join on each of those threads. So this is sort of like a wait that you have for parent. And what this function will do is it suspends the execution of the calling process until the target thread finishes. So in our program, our initial process, it will create one thread. The thread will do the summation calculation, and while it's doing that, the calling process will be in suspended state. Okay. Otherwise, if you don't call this, then both will continue separately. We don't want that. So here, what are the arguments? TID is the ID of the target thread, of course. If the calling process is interested in the exit status of the target thread, it can catch it using pointer. So when the thread, we'll soon discuss this function, when the thread calls the exit function, the exit status can be passed on to the calling process, just like for parent child. So basically, if it was successful execution, unsuccessful execution, that kind of information can be passed. So PTR is the address of the memory area that receives the exit status of target thread. If you are not interested as a calling process in this, getting the exit status of the target thread, you can leave this PTR as null. Okay. So pthread join, suspending the execution of calling process till target thread finishes. Last one, pthread exit. This terminates the calling thread, just like you had a exit for a process in chapter 3. Now we have pthread underscore exit for a thread. So this terminates the calling thread. Resources used by thread can be returned back to the calling process. Okay. And functions that make available the function makes available value PTR to any successful join with a terminating thread. So perhaps it can put the status value there, and then using the PTR in the join you can catch it. Again, this is optional. Okay. So data type for the pointer is void, which means it can potentially point to any data type data by casting. So it can pass a pointer, which can be used by the calling function if needed. So maybe it wants to pass some results, maybe the thread wants to pass some results back, or it wants to pass an exit status. So in any case, if it needs to pass something, some piece of data to the calling process, it can use this pointer. Okay, so pthread join and pthread exit. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide number 10, right? So now we discuss one multi-threading program. So here what we are doing is, this is again from the textbook, and we will again share the code with you, so you can run it on your Linux machine. So again, it's a POSIX thread, has to be run on Linux machine, and this shows how to create a simple thread and some of the thread API functions. This program implements a summation function where the summation operation is run as a separate thread. Okay. Now we need some header files, and pthread for the call, for calling the thread function, stdio, and in addition we also need stdlib, which although it's not in this book, in this slide, we should have it, and the program that we share will have stdlib.h also. Otherwise you might get some warning for the a2i function which we use. Okay, so we include stdlib.h. A couple of variables, right? They are global variables. They are declared outside a function. So the reason for this is we want both main and our thread function to access them. In sum, this data is shared by the threads. So if I scroll down, the value of the answer will be in this sum. The function which the thread will call is called, we call it runner and then void parameter. So, right, that's the name of the function, and then the parameter is that we will be providing is the value of n, from the command line. So from the command line we type 10. That means we need the sum of the first 10 numbers. So that will be our argument. So now we go into our int main and then int argc char star argv. So we are using command line arguments, which means the value of n will be specified from the command line. First command line argument, what will it be? First command line argument is the name of the program, the name of the executable. In this case, a.out. And then second command line argument will be the value of n. So from your course on C programming, you would know that these are represented as an array of pointers char star argv. So argv0 is a pointer to the first command line argument, which is a.out. argv1 is a pointer to the second command line argument, which will be a value of n. Okay. So first of course we declare the thread identifier. Pthread underscore t is type def, right? Probably an integer. So type def for that int and then tid. So this is the declaration of the thread identifier. Then set of attributes pthread underscore attr underscore t and then attr. So pthread underscore attr underscore t is the structure name or the complex data type, and then attr is an attribute of that. Okay, so set of attributes attr points to that. Okay. So now if args, so we do a couple of error checking. So now because we're using command line arguments, so a couple of things that can go wrong if argc is not equal to 2. So if you just type a.out without specifying n, or if you just specify n without a.out. So what you'll get, error message, usage is a.out and then integer value. Alright. So first error condition checks whether you have two arguments or not. Second error condition, what does it check? So if you see, it checks that this second argument has to be non-negative. Okay. So if so how do you get that? Because argv1 will contain value of n, and what will be the data type of that value of n? Well, it will not be an integer, it will be a string. So now the string has to first be converted to an integer. So for that we use a2i. a2i argv1 converts that string character 1 followed by character 0 into the integer 10. So if that is less than 0, print this argument and then again type. So two error conditions we are checking for, that the number of command line arguments have to be 2 and that the second command line argument, the value of n, has to be non-negative. Now we get the default attributes, we discussed that system call. So default value of scheduling policy, default value of priority and so on. If we want, we can change it later, of course. Now we create the thread, pthread underscore create, exactly what we discussed earlier, and tid and attr runner argv1. So this will create the thread, tid will now contain the thread id, attr will be a pointer to the thread attributes, runner will be the name of the function that it has to call, pointed to that, and so pointed to a function, and argv1 will be the argument that they're calling the function, value of n. So now we are calling pthread join and we are waiting. So tid will specify which thread we are waiting for, because note that now we'll do this some examples later in which one process can spawn or can create multiple threads. So let's say 5 threads. So then it needs to know, you need to specify which thread it is waiting on. So tid will have that value in pthread join. and nulls indicates that it is not interested in any value being passed by the thread when it exits. Okay. So now pthread join. Now we wait for the thread to exit. Now thread will execute. Call the function runner with this argument, and what is being passed is argv1. So argv1 is a pointer to that string. Let's say 10. So void star param is equal to argv1. So param is also pointed to that string of digits, string of characters 1 and 0, let's say. And now what it is, upper is equal to a to I param. So we convert that string of character 1 followed by character 0 to an integer. Values in upper. And now very simple, we just sum from 1 to n, from 1 to 10. For I is 1, I is less than equal to over I plus plus, sum is equal to sum plus I. So this is a shorthand. Sum plus equal to I is a shorthand for sum is equal to sum plus I. Right? And once you get out of this, for loop, note you're checking if upper is greater than 0. Right? Now, once you calculate the sum, it is available. It is, and note that sum is a global variable, so it's available to main also. And then the work of the thread is done. So pthread exit, pthread underscore exit, and again not passing anything, so calling it with 0. Right? And now it will the calling process, it will get out of join, stop waiting, and then all it does is print the value of sum. So when you run this program, it will ask you for the value of n which you output, and then the answer it will print is sum is equal to, and then the value of sum. Okay. So what we have in this program is, we have a process which is calling a thread and specifying the function that the thread has to execute, and also passing one argument, and the argument is passed through the command line. Okay. So once the thread is created, it starts executing at this runner function, and what it does is calculates a summation and makes that result available in sum. And then while the thread is executing, the calling process waits on a using join, waiting for the thread to exit. Once the thread exits, it resumes execution and prints the value of sum. Okay. So note that the difference between this and another program in which you have parent and child is calculating sum and then passing to the parent. So there both parent and child are separate processes, separate address spaces, and when they need to communicate, you have to set up either message passing or shared memory. Here all of this is enabled by default. So you can see for this kind of operations, having a thread is a lot better. Okay. But many of the operations are similar to parent-child. Creation of a child, so here creation of a thread, waiting on a child, here waiting on the thread, exiting, child exiting, here thread exiting. Okay. So I hope this program is clear, and of course we will send you this program and you can compile and run it. Right, so it should run on Linux, Unix, perhaps on OS X also. Now one important thing is, when you compile this message, you have to compile it with the LP thread flag. Okay. So when you compile it, you have to compile it with the LP thread flag. Okay. So what it will be, what will be the compilation command? GCC and then the name of this program, let's say thread POSIX.c, and then space and then dash LP thread. Okay. So what this will do is at runtime it will link all the it will link the pthread library. So you're already calling the pthread library using .h, but the pthread library has to be linked at runtime. So therefore GCC thread POSIX.c space dash LP thread. This will dynamically link the pthread library to this program, and program will run properly. So again, those directions will be given in that piece of code that you have. Okay. So I hope that is clear. Okay. Now I am on slide 11, and this is just showing the rest of the program which we already discussed. Okay. So this is the whole program in slides 10 and 11, and of course we will be sharing this with you. So we will be sharing the .c file with you, so you can study that and then you can execute it on your system. Okay.